the state apiarist.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, we're good.
I'm going to, as Ed said, I'm going to try to cover some of the things that have been happening in the state and across the United States, things from this past year, things that are upcoming, things you should be aware of as far as your bees. And so I'm going to see if I can share my screen. And we'll see how this works.
Looks good.
Well, actually, I think you're seeing the.
Okay, let's put it like this. It's looking better.
Let me let me go back to the share here. For some reason it is not.
There we go.
How's that? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So State of the Bees apiary program update. And of course, it is not working on my side.
So you got to spend another.
There we go. I just gotta find the right buttons. Remember, I'm an old man. I just new technology thing.
Keep hitting the button somehow.
Anyway, let's first talk about the elephant in the room. If you weren't aware of it, things are in bloom this year that shouldn't be in bloom at this time of year. I pulled up this the growing degree days for Loudoun County earlier this evening, and you could see on here on the side that it is 29 days ahead of where it should be on average this time of year. So things are in bloom now that shouldn't be in bloom until April. And of course, your bees don't know what a calendar is. And so their development, their growth, their expectations are all based on what's going on around them in nature. And so all of those things are in bloom up in Loudoun County. I know Eric's cherry trees came into bloom, elms, maples, all kinds of things ahead of time. Bees have been just exploding inside the hives. I was in some hives today, and we're going through reversals already. Actually, we had swarm reports about 3 weeks ago down in Chesterfield County. So things are hopping here. I'm sure they're hopping up your way because, like I said, you're a month ahead, just like we are. That said, if you haven't been in your hives, please do so as quickly as possible. The bees, if they're getting crowded, they're going to be swarming. I know we've got a few days from now, we've got colder temperatures coming in. Last week, I think one of our local forecasters said that he was anticipating below normal cold temperatures in the next few weeks, and should last a while. And they've started to put up those temperatures, and the cold temperatures are actually about 1 or 2 degrees below normal. So although it's below normal, it's not really going to slow things down that much. It's just going to bring it back to a normal progression, so that we're going to consistently be a month ahead if that's the case. So again, make sure you know what your bees are doing. Go in, tomorrow I think we're having another warm day. If you've got time, go inside, see where your bees are inside your colony, see how, what kind of congestion they're running into, so that you don't have problems with swarming occurring. Also, what we have seen this past winter, because there is no winter, is the bees have been eating up all of the food stores. So a lot of the colonies are very light in honey. So you'll want to check if, even if you don't go into the hive, lift up the back of the hives, see what kind of weight you're feeling as we're getting into these cooler temperatures in this coming week, possibly 2 weeks. You want to make sure they have adequate amount of access to food, that being sugar, so that they can cluster properly at night, and that they can continue to tend to the larva during the day, keep the pupa warm so that they can progress. It's essential that they cluster on the pupa, because that's the life stage that is least tolerant of colder temperatures, and it only takes a few degrees below that 92, 93 degrees that you start seeing deformities and death of the pupil, pupating larvae. So you want to make sure that the bees themselves have sufficient amount of access to sugar that they can generate the heat they need in that cluster to keep everything at the right temperature. So that's my warning for the day. New beekeepers, those of you taking the class, see that black line on this graph. That's what it should be, and that's what we normally see. So like I said, things are hopping a little bit faster, and so if you've got bees on order, it's likely that it will affect when the flow is when you get those bees. So be aware that as we progress through the year, you may need to start feeding after they get here. You certainly feed them when they arrive, but keep an eye on their progress. Make sure they're drawing out comb, that they're raising young, that they're putting away sufficient stores of food so that they can make it through the winter.
Keith, are you finding this a month ahead throughout the state?
Yes. Yeah, we're Richmond's the same way, Southwest, Southeast, everybody is. It really anywhere below, I guess, Pennsylvania, about the middle of Pennsylvania, everybody's ahead. If you go up into the Maine and upper New York, so forth on the East Coast, they're getting back to kind of a normal temperature wise. So they're still ahead. They're just not as far ahead as we are. But it's just, I mean, like I said, I mean, we've had years where we've been a week or two ahead, but never this far ahead in my memory. So that it can, like I said, it can impact the bees, but more importantly, you need to adjust your management of when you do certain things accordingly, so that you don't, you're prepared for the flow, you're prepared for that swarm prevention ahead of where you normally would be doing it. So one of the things that I've been doing the past few months is talking to people about pesticides, because there's oftentimes a misconception, if you will, about what a pesticide is. I'll mention miticides and talk to people about miticides, or people will tell me about this miticide or that miticide that they're using. And I'll, change the subject and say, or not change the subject, but refer to it as a pesticide. And they say, no, I'm not using pesticides, I'm using a miticide. Well, unfortunately, miticides are pesticides. Pesticides are divided into categories of what organism that it impacts primarily, what target it has. So, an herbicide is going to be targeting plants. An insecticide is going to be targeting the insects. A miticide is going to be targeting the mites. And so these are all pesticides, just subcategories of a pesticide. And when we start talking about things like insecticides and miticides and avicides and so forth. So as defined by the EPA, a pesticide is any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pest. Certainly we have a lot of pests in our bee yard. Both invertebrate and vertebrate, and then it's also defined as any substance or mixture of substances intended for use as a plant regulator, defoliator, or desiccant. So it's not just a pest, an animal that it is targeting. It also targets the plants as well. And so they also add in any nitrogen stabilizer. Not sure how that plays into everything, but that's how the EPA defines a pesticide. And then they go on to allow, tell people that, when you look at a product, you need to look at it to see what it has as far as its characteristics. So when we talk about a pesticide, our Office of Pesticide Services will tell you, when you're applying a pesticide, when you're disposing of a pesticide, when you're storing a pesticide, when you're mixing pesticides, up and down the line, the label is the law. And so you need to look at the label to see, number one, of course, is that what is the target organism that the pesticide is intended to mitigate. If it's not listed on that label, you shouldn't be using it. You want to look to see how it's properly stored so that you don't, potentially contaminate not just the environment around us, but potentially the environment in your home. We have a lot of pesticides that are stored within our home. I'm sure that you have as well, garages, even underneath the kitchen sink. And so you need to know how to properly store that so that you don't get contamination of yourself, of your immediate environment, or even your food stores. A lot of times we are mixing their pesticides with other things, like when we're treating for varroa mites, we may mix it in with some sugar syrup. That's sugar syrup. If you're mixing it in the kitchen and then you start putting in the pesticide, now all of a sudden your countertop may be contaminated, and so that's going to spread to the next meal that you're preparing. So you want to be very careful about how to storage, how to handle it. And then lastly, of course, besides the application, the last thing, of course, is that disposal. You want to look on that label to see how to dispose of it properly. So again, you don't run into contamination problems, that it leaches into the soil or it leaches into the waters, so that we have problems, with their environment. But if you look on the label, it actually will indicate whether it's a pesticide or not. And so what you want to look for is whether it makes a claim to prevent, kill, destroy, mitigate, remove, repel, or any other similar action against a pest, indirectly states or implies an action against a pest, draws a comparison to a pesticide, or has a picture of a pest on it. So that's pretty straightforward. If it looks like, what did it say? If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably not a dog. So the same thing with the pesticide. If it's something on that label that tells you that this is a poison that is going to mitigate or eliminate or control or suppress a pest, whether that's animal or pest, or animal or plant, then it's likely to be a pesticide. So that in mind, I've got a quiz for you. So, is this a pesticide? Yes or no? Let me see some hands. Yes, if it's a pesticide, raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing some hands up. Yes, this is definitely a pesticide. This was one of the first pesticides that we had for treating the varroa mite. Miticure was the first. Apistan came soon after, once they took the Miticure off the market. And of course, then we progressed to trying to come up with a formic acid formulation, and then kind of giving up on that for a while and moving on to Checkmite, Acumaphosphate, and organophosphate. Then we started seeing lots of others come along, like the Thymals, like the Apiguard and Apilife Var, and now we have recently the Apivar, which is again getting back to the Amitraz, which was in the Miticure, their first miticide for the varroa mite. So yes, that's definitely a pesticide. So next on the list, is this a pesticide? Yes or no? Raise your hand if you think it is. Okay, easy, right? You got repels and kills ticks, mites, and mosquitoes. No doubt that that's a pesticide. And you probably use this a lot when you're going out into the woods. I know when we're going out for apiary inspections, we always have cans of permethrin with us to combat against the ticks and chiggers and other things that are liable to get up inside of our pants or stick to us and get carried home. So definitely this is a pesticide. Next on the list, Clorox bleach. Is this a pesticide? Raise your hand if you think it is. No hands up. What does it say right there on the label? Kills 99.9% of germs. Didn't catch that one, did you? Yes, it is a pesticide. It just doesn't have to be registered as a pesticide because it's used in medical to disinfect medical instruments and so forth. And so it's got kind of a waiver if you will, in FIFRA or with EPA as far as having to be registered as a pesticide. But definitely it does have those pesticide qualities. It is technically a pesticide. It just doesn't have to be listed or doesn't have to be registered with their Office of Pesticide Services in Virginia as a pesticide. All right, next one on the list. Is this a pesticide? This is a container of oxalic acid from Savogran. How many people will think it is a pesticide? And my question to you is, where does it say it's going to kill anything? It's a wood bleach. It does not list anything about killing. Does not have any implications that it's going to kill something. So this product is not a pesticide. Oxalic acid is a pesticide in its product that is produced, labeled, sold as a pesticide, but this particular product is not. And so if you're using this, you are using the wrong thing. And I would caution you that using this, you could be harming your bees because you don't know what else is in here besides oxalic acid. One of the things that we have been running into issues with Roundup is that some products are leading us to causing cancer, and other products that have the same active ingredient are not causing it. And what we're finding is that it's those inert products that are or ingredients that are being put into that product that is causing those problems. It's not the actual herbicide, the active ingredient, it's the additional things that are going into there. And this is a product very similar. We've got a pure product basically of the oxalic acid that you can buy from Dedant and Man Lake and all the other bee supply stores, that is labeled for and registered as a miticide oxalic acid for use in your beehives. This is not. In fact, we often see this showing up at the bee conferences. There's a gentleman, several people that will show up there, and they'll have that on the table, and state apiarists are very quick to run up to them and say, please remove that before I have to call our Office of Pesticide Services and have you arrested and hauled away, because it cannot be sold as a pesticide. So is everybody thoroughly confused? Oxalic acid is a miticide, but only in certain forms or certain products.
Okay, I'm not taking your tests no more.
Okay, so speaking of pesticides, speaking of miticides, speaking of trying to keep the varroa mite under control, because that is our #1 pest. Well, let me rephrase that. That's our #2 pest. Anybody want to volunteer what they think is the #1 pest of the honeybee? Everybody's going to hold back. Okay, look at your screen, at all those people that are on your screen. Every single one of them are the #1 pest of the honeybee. We are taking more habitat, more forage, more, introducing more diseases and pests every day for the honeybee, and not just that pollinator, but other pollinators as well. So if you really want to know what is the #1 pest of the honeybee, it is the two-legged man. That is running around trying to do their best to tell the honeybees what to do and how to do it, and they are not responding very well at all. So #2 on the list is the varroa mite. It's causing more problems as far as the transmission of diseases like viruses, promoting stress within the hive that allows other diseases to cause problems, allows pests like the small hive beetle, wax moth to come in and cause problems. It is injuring the bees directly by its feeding behavior, as we have known for years, but finally figured out how it's doing it. They're feeding on the lipids or the fat bodies of the honeybees. And that fat body is basically the fountain of youth for our honeybees. It's allowing them to live longer in the wintertime. It's allowing them to live healthier under less stress, to pull in those lipids and be able to live, 4 to 6 months in wintertime as opposed to 4 to 6 weeks like they do in the winter, in the summertime, when they have less of those fat bodies there. So there's a lot of things that we do to try to suppress the varroa mite. I have a hard time with individuals that think that we'll be able to eradicate the varroa mite. What we have to do is to teach our bees, or help our bees, to be able to live with the varroa mites. And that, in some cases, is to start looking at breeding programs to see what lines of bees are less susceptible to them, and also those bees that are able to combat them better. As far as to eliminate or suppress their reproduction and their ability to spread around. This list that you see here is from a few years ago. We're coming up with an update, should come out very soon, but pretty much every year it's the same each year. As far as what people are using, some things new, like oxalic acid. 2019, I think, was the first time that it showed up on this list. But if we look at the list, formic acid is number one in the usage of what beekeepers, and this is primarily hobbyist beekeepers, but formic acid in the form of quick strips, or if it's Formic Pro, or just the liquid formic acid that people are still making their own formulations with, that is the number one usage. About a little over 25% of beekeepers are using formic acid in their hives to suppress the varroa mite populations. Number two on the list, about 24%, of course, is oxalic acid. I'm going to talk a little bit more about oxalic acid, how to use it, and continue on that theme of using it properly and by the label. But oxalic acid is a seems to be what beekeepers talk most about. I know that formic acid has been used for many years. The short life or short exposure, I should say, in natural nature of these two products, formic acid and oxalic acid, have made it very appealing to beekeepers, particularly if you want to go with the organic honey approach, because with the formic acid, that's a naturally occurring product within the honey, and it's also self-regulating. So if it does get over, honey gets contaminated with it within a few months, few weeks, depending on the temperature and so forth, it self-regulates and comes back to its natural level. The other thing is that, of course, the formic acid is the only product on this list that will penetrate into the cappings. And as many of you know, formic acid has an efficacy in controlling the mites underneath the cappings, where most of the varroa mites are located. So when we have brood there, anywhere from 60, 70, sometimes 80% of the reproducing mites are underneath protective cappings. And so formic acid is very short period of exposure, usually about 2 to 4 weeks. Sometimes people go for 4 weeks, but typically within 2 weeks, treatment is done. And so you can be in and out very quickly. It does penetrate into the capping, so it doesn't give 100%, or doesn't give as good a control as the mites that are outside on the bees, but it does give some control inside of those cappings. Oxalic acid, also a natural product. And so it's not as self-regulating. But with the levels that are being used within the colony, the EPA, the FDA, and the EPA agree that that you can use it with honey supers in place. So formic acid, oxalic acid. If you have honey super in place, you can be treating your hives with that. The other thing, of course, which is the first of the synthetic miticides on the list, is Apiarist. So that's we're getting down less than 10% of the beekeepers are using that. It is a newer product. This is the amitraz based or active ingredient that's in there. We are starting to see some resistance to the amitraz, which was, I think, surprising to many of the researchers, because of the fact that it was believed that amitraz had different modes of action if you will, with control of the mites. And that if the mites develop resistance to one of those modes of action, there was another one that would take place. So they anticipated that it would take a good while before resistance built up into there. But I think, like many of our politicians, they forget about history. And so if you go back about 40 years, you'll see where mitocure, amitraz base, was used. And beekeepers at that time, particularly the commercial beekeepers, were using a what we called a cattle collar at the time. So it was a collar that was impregnated with a strip that was impregnated with the amitraz, and you hung it around the cow's neck as a miticide. Beekeepers were taking those cattle collars and cutting strips in lengths of 6 to 8 inches and hanging them in their hives to control the varroa mite. And so once they got a product that was approved and available for use, the mitocure, we immediately started seeing resistance because it had been so heavily used before we even got the product on the market for the beekeepers to use. So it was very quickly taken off the market. And then of course, as I mentioned before, we moved on to the Apistan.
Keith, quick question. Are you showing any resistance whatsoever to the organics?
We haven't seen, like I said, for the formic acid, also the oxalic, the fact that the exposure is so fast, we're not seeing that prolonged residual inside of the hive. So with the Apistan, what happened there was the fluvalinate that was in there was being absorbed into the wax. It was lipophilic. And so it was being absorbed into the wax. And so the pesticide or the active ingredient was there almost continuously and was kept knocking down the susceptible population. So we saw a very rapid resistance to that product. The prolonged exposure, just to use, another historical fact, we used oxytetracycline terramycin for decades against American foul brood and European foul brood without any problems. In the 1990s, the USDA came out with what they refer to as an extender patty, where they had vegetable grease and sugar and mixed in the terramycin with it to give, so that the beekeepers didn't have to keep coming back and reapplying the terramycin, because you have to, with the powdered sugar solution or even the liquid solution that you were using for the treatment with the terramycin, you'd have to come back every couple of days to retreat. But after roughly about 2-3 weeks, it was done. Well, with the extender patty, that was based on the bee's ability to consume that grease patty. And so you would see that grease patty in there for weeks and months inside the hive, and you had that prolonged exposure to the terramycin. And once the beekeepers started seeing that, we started seeing resistance to terramycin within the American foul brood. And so that's how you got that moving on to tylosin and lincomycin. With the oxalic acid, if you use the vaporizer, it's gone. The residual is gone within a few days. The same thing with the dribble, with the liquid solution, it's gone within a few days. So we're not seeing that prolonged exposure, and so we don't anticipate seeing. I mean, everything we anticipate seeing resistance to it if you use it enough and for long enough and often enough. But the less time of that exposure, the less chance of that resistance building up sooner. So yes, potentially we're going to see it, but we haven't seen it yet within the oxalic and the formic acid.
Thank you.
The Apiguard, the thymol base, and of course the Hopguard, the hops, the beta hops acid. Those are the next ones on the list. And of course, those are, less than 5%. And, beekeepers use other things as well. You see the Apistan still on the list, a checkmite, drone, there's management things that people use, the brood break, the drone comb, the requeening, using resistant lines of queens, powdered sugar, the Downer method is still out there. But these are the ones that are the most common, the most popular. So that basically the top 5 of what beekeepers use. and of course in the order in which they do. And oxalic acid is gaining legs, if you will, becoming more and more popular, and soon it will probably surpass oxalic acid. One of the concerns we have with the formic acid, of course, is that it is highly toxic to us. It is a fumigant, and so it's temperature sensitive. Also, if you are, again, mixing it yourself, but also if you're handling it on a warm day, you can be breathing in a lot of that formic acid. And I can tell you from experience, it will take your breath away. It will put you in a hospital. It'll knock you down. And so you want to be very careful in using the formic acid. Oxalic acid, a little more forgiving, if you will, but some of the ways that we're using it, it can be highly toxic to us. So we want to be very careful with that. So I want to concentrate on the oxalic acid because, again, most people should be familiar with formic acid, how to handle it, how to use it, when to use it. Like I said, you don't want to be using it when it's 90 degrees outside, 95 degrees outside. You also don't want to be using it when it's 30 degrees outside. It just doesn't, it either volatilizes off too much in the former or not at all in the latter. And if that's the case, it's not going to be effective. And in the former, hot days, it could actually kill your bees. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I don't recommend using formic acid in that September time period where we can get those 90-degree plus days. But again, concentrating on oxalic acid, these are some of the dangers that you have with it. Skin, eye, burning, gastrointestinal tract burns and so forth. It is an acid, so it's going to have those impacts. But one of the things that stood out to me is the kidney damage. One of the things that they have noted with exposure to oxalic acid is that you're more prone to develop kidney stones. And anyone in the room that has had a kidney stone knows you do not want to go through that. I've had several, and it just it is extremely painful. I kid my wife that my kidney stones are more painful than her giving birth to her 3 children, and she kind of looks at me with a look of disbelief. But women I've talked to that have had kidney stones say, yeah, they'd rather go through multiple births than to go through having one kidney stone passage. So lots of problems that are associated with it, lots of concerns that we have with that exposure to oxalic acid, both ingesting and breathing in. And that gets us to what you need to do to wear in order to protect yourself against that. Of course, long sleeve, long pants, socks, shoes. That's normal for all pesticides that you're using. Gloves, normal for every pesticide you're using, whether it's formic acid, oxalic acid, HopGuard, Apolife VAR, Apiguard, whatever you're using. You should be wearing gloves. You should be wearing protection of your skin so that you don't get that exposure. In fact, any of you that have been out with or had one of our inspectors come to your bee yards, you probably noted that we all wear nitrile gloves. And it's not because that is sting resistant. It's because it's chemical resistant, because we just don't know what we're putting our hands on when we go into a beehive. And so we're taking precautions to protect ourselves from being exposed to those chemicals. With oxalic acid, you also want to be protecting exposure to your eyes, of course, the goggles, but also whether you are using the liquid formulation or the vaporizer, you need to have a mask on to prevent it from being inhaled or ingested. And so if you're using the liquid formulation, you want to use the particulate filtering. See if I can get my pointer working here. And I'm not sure if I can. All right, I'm just not going to fool with it. If you go to the again, with the liquid formulation, you want to have something over your nose, over your mouth, the NR&P, the N95 filters that you hear with the COVID-19. Those are the kinds of filters that you want. If you're using the vaporizer, you want to go with the full face elastometric half mask half face mask respirator that has the cartridges on the sides that will filter out any of those particulates that have now been volatilized that you may be breathing in from those vapors. And let's try this again. There we go. And I do want to point out the picture that you see on the left there, where it shows all of those protective gear, the glasses, the gloves, the mask, and so forth. This comes from Penn State. And look to see what product they put on there as far as what they're using for oxalic acid. I mean, this is on their website. This is in their publications. I'm thinking, what are you thinking? So, but if you ever see anybody from Penn State, point that out to them that you're in violation. The other thing, okay, so with the oxalic acid, we've got multiple ways or opportunities or methods of application. Of course, if we've got packages, we can dilute the oxalic acid into the 1-to-1 sugar syrup, and we can spray it on the packages where all of the bees or the mites are on the bees themselves. So you can spray them before you install them into the hive. If the bees are already in the hive, you got things going on inside of there, you can use the dribble method. Again, you're diluting it in 1-to-1 sugar syrup, that 35 grams per liter. You're applying 5 milliliters per frame or 50 milliliters maximum. That's a total of 1.75 grams. Also requires, again, doesn't penetrate the capping, so you want little or no brood there so that you are able to get to the mites themselves. You want to have as many mites on the bees, on the adult bees, as possible, so that when we're treating them, those mites are getting exposed to it. And then the option 3 is the vaporizer. You're using 1 gram per brood box. You got the wand vaporizer. You've got now the Jono and the Provap that hook up to the battery, that heat up, or you can plug it into the wall. Some of these heat up the oxalic acid and turn it into a vapor that will get into the hive. In this case, you're putting in 1 gram per brood box. Most people are going to have 2 boxes of brood, if you will, or 2 boxes as they use for the brood. And so 2 grams per hive. Again, little or no brood present. We want all of those bees, all the mites, to be out on the adult bees so that we can get the exposure. And we've covered the PPE, the personal protection equipment. There's an amended label out now that came out about 1.5 years ago that allows for certain things that didn't occur with the first label. And number 1 on the list, as I mentioned before, was the fact that you could leave your honey supers in place. You do not have to remove the honey supers from the hive when you're treating with the oxalic acid. But some people think that there's a 4th option that they have. They've been reading in the ABJ, and they've been going on to certain person's website, and they've been seeing how they can use other methods to treat the hive. And they base this on the fact that within FIFRA, or I should say, within the agriculture code, federal code, there are definitions that relate to FIFRA, the Pesticide Act, that will allow them to use other methods of treatment. And specifically, that goes to that section 2E, where they're talking about using a pesticide inconsistent with the labeling. And if you are employing any method or application not prohibited by the labeling, unless the label of that product specifically says you cannot do, you have to use those that are listed on there, then you're not limited to that method. And so this other method out there, using the glycerin and other ways of applying the oxalic acid, they're using this definition or explanation of the definition of what using a pesticide inconsistent with its labeling means, to say that, okay, it doesn't specifically say I can't apply it this way. I don't have to just use the dribble. I don't have to just use the spray for the package. I don't have to just use the vaporizer. I can use other methods to put it in there because this definition allows me to do that. Well, I would counter that by saying that there's also another part of the labeling aspect of it. And that means that you can use less than what's recommended on the label, what's said on the label, but you can't use more than what's on the label. And so if you refer back to what I was talking about before with the dribble, where you're putting 1.75 grams, and the vaporizer where you got 2 brood boxes, you're putting 2 grams of oxalic acid in there. If you look at the glycerin methodology, you're putting 50 grams of oxalic acid inside of the hide, which is a violation of the label. And so we're still, I mean, they're still working on the glycerin methodology, and more than likely it will be added to the label. But we're seeing inconsistencies with it. Certain areas of the United States, it's not working. Certain ways of the big way the beekeepers are doing it, it's just not working. The other is getting back to my concern about the fact that you're mixing this up probably on the kitchen counter and heating it up and causing it to have some volatilization. You need to be very aware of the fact that you're putting your health and your family's health in danger. And lastly, again, referring back to what I talked about earlier with the extender patty, with the terramycin, this gel is going to be in there not for a few days like the vapor or the dribble. It's going to be in there for weeks. And we may start seeing resistance to oxalic acid developing because of that long-term exposure that the mites are going to be now having to the oxalic acid. So I think in the future it may be something that beekeepers may find useful. It's just not something you should be experimenting with right now.
Hey, Keith, excuse me.
Yeah.
Before we move on to that, we have a question. Could you expand a little bit on the spray option and package treatment?
Yeah.
Please.
Like I said, there's 3, if you look on the label, there's three methodologies. So the spray method is the same as what you're mixing it up the same way as you're doing with the dribble. You're making up a 1-to-1 sugar syrup. You're diluting 35 grams of that sugar syrup or 35 grams into 1 liter of that sugar syrup. And if anybody has worked with oxalic acid in the dribble or the liquid form, you've got to heat up that sugar syrup in order for it to be suspended. So once it's suspended in there, you've got the option of, if it's a package, you can put it into a spray bottle and then apply roughly the same thing, that 5 milliliters, no more than 50 milliliters on the bees inside the package. So you're spraying through the screen, before you're installing, bring it inside so they're not out in the cold and so forth. You don't want to get bees wet when it's cold. So you want to have it on there. And it's a one-time application. Give them time to ingest the syrup. That's the way the dribble and the spray work, is that the bees are actually ingesting it. We don't know the actual mode of action of oxalic acid, how it's affecting the mites, but we do know that whether it's the vaporizer, where they are maybe taking it in through the pads that are on their tarsi, or the dribble spray, the bees may be ingesting it, and it may be getting into the mites by feeding on the bees. But like I said, one of the things that we see is that as long as the mites are on the bees, we're going to get pretty good control of the varroa mites. Does that answer the question that you had?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The other thing that that beekeepers are looking at, besides other methods of treating, is to using multiple treatments. Most of the treatments that were described before, the dribble, the spray, the vaporizer, it's intended as a one-time application. With the amendment to the label, they're allowing for multiple applications. Unfortunately, they're leaving it up to the states to decide, the interval and how often and so forth. And so we're not real happy with USDA because they are actually the ones that hold the license with the EPA as far as that registration. USDA is the one that has it. They have contracted with another company to produce the oxalic acid for packaging. But what we're seeing is that multiple applications may not necessarily give you the control that you want. Research that has recently come out from work that was done in Spain and Italy showed that it's not as effective at reducing the mite population, but it can hold them from increasing. Work that I did this past summer using the dribble method, I saw the same thing. That it didn't reduce the population, but it at least kept them from growing much beyond where it was. And that can be good as far as if you've got a population that is below the economic threshold, that'll help you to maintain them below the economic threshold. But, if we're seeing, 4 mites per 100, 6 mites per 100, 7 mites per 100, on and on, and we want to reduce it because it's over the economic threshold and it's at a level, the mite levels are at a point where it's going to be injurious to the bees, that multiple application is not going to be as effective. So what they're doing is that they're applying it in 5 to 7 day intervals for anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks, and there's active brood rearing going on. And so again, as I mentioned before, the mites, most of the mites are going to be under those capped cells. They're not going to be exposed to the oxalic acid. And the residual is so short that as they come out of the cappings over the next 2 weeks, they may not be exposed at a high enough level. So again, multiple applications are showing that it can hold the mite populations at a more or less even with where it is, but it's not going to reduce the mite populations if you have a problem with the varroa mites. You need to go to that broodless state in order to get most of the mites, if not all of the mites, out onto the bees, and then use oxalic acid to knock down the mite population. You probably have heard the news about the American foul brood vaccine. This was all the rage in January, beginning of January. I was down in Florida for the American Beekeeper Federation meeting. We had a joint meeting with the Apiary Inspectors of America and the apiculturists, the researchers across the United States. And so everybody was wanted to get a hold of the Daylin Animal Health Group and have them talk and so forth, and they were nowhere to be seen. They had a table there, but I think that the news reporters had first dibs on them, so we just weren't able to pursue the information that we wanted it. Just to let you know, it is not available on the market right now. They are taking orders for it. It was developed from dead American foul brood cells. So if you go back to those vaccines from back with the salt and all the others, the vaccines that we're seeing in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, they're basically going about it the same way. They're using dead American foul brood cells to develop resistance within the queen, so that she passes that on to the eggs as she's laying them. So it's fed to a caged queen. Some dispute between some of the researchers as to whether it's the workers that are feeding them. You have to have workers there to feed the queen, or you can feed the queen directly. I'm gonna leave that up to them to fight it out. the fact is you have to have a cage queen, you have to feed it to them. The downside is that we're only seeing 30 to 50% efficacy in reducing the American foul brood infection. So where I'm seeing this going is that commercial queen breeders, raisers, will be feeding this in transit to their, people that are buying the queens from them. They're going to be using it as a marketing, as far as saying that, they've been inoculated with the vaccine, and you'll have some efficacy, you'll have some resistance to the American foul brood infection. But the truth of the matter is that we see very little American foul brood out there. European foul brood, we see a good bit of that, but we don't see it. We rarely see American foul brood in Virginia. There was a outbreak in New York, I think last year before last. Dayland Animal actually contacted them to see if they could run some field tests with them, and they just didn't have enough cases for them to be running the field test on. So yes, American foul brood is our primary, most dreaded, feared bacterial disease. But the good thing is that we see very little of it. And part of that is attributed to you as beekeepers, is that you are going through replacing, removing old comb, putting in new foundation, allowing them to keep the spores of American foul brood down inside of your hives, so that we don't see that outbreak of American foul brood. So continue that. If you haven't had American foul brood in the past, if your management is that you're going to rotate your comb on a regular basis annually, taking out some of the comb, putting in new foundation, that's going to be, that preventive measures is going to be your best defense against the American foul brood. This is like I said, the vaccine is a nice case study. I'd like to see it with the European foul brood, if they can develop it, because we have much more of an incidence of European foul brood in our populations. And speaking of our bees and queens, the Apiary Inspectors of America did a survey to find out, how much movement of bees, bee products, hive products, as far as the bees are concerned, are being moved from state to state. And you can see the numbers here. Importing is the states are saying how much they're bringing in, and then of course the exporting states, how much are they sending out. It's interesting that there's almost a little over 2 million or 200,000 colony difference in what they say they are importing as to what's being exported state to state. So that goes back to their regulatory aspect of we do require beekeepers or individuals that are bringing bees into the state to get an entry permit from us, but not all states do. Not all states have a Apiarist on hand or in place in order to monitor these things. Number one on the list, of course, California. They leave it up to the counties to deal with any regulations of honeybee colonies that are coming into there. Packages that are being exported, imported, nukes, of course. We have most of our local associations, and you're one of them, has made a concerted effort to stop bringing packages into the state and spreading diseases around. The way we got varroa mites, the way we got trachea mites before that, the way we got small hive beetle, were packages that were coming into the state. And so with that, looking locally, looking at products that are being raised locally and providing a resource for our beekeepers locally, that's been a big plus for our state. It's been a real strain on our inspection service because all those nukes, all those apiaries that are raising queens, that are raising nukes, have to be inspected. You have to have a health certificate that goes along with the bill of sale. And so we're stretching our inspection service thin, but it's a nice thing to see because we're seeing less disease as a result of that. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention that came up at that meeting was that Canada is looking for queens and bees. And so one of the things that that AB, American Beekeeping Federation, the American Honey Producers of America are looking at and working with Canadian beekeepers is to see if they can open up the borders to send United States bees and queens up to Canada to help them compensate for all the losses that they're getting. So they're not having to bring in bees from Australia and New Zealand and South America and potentially, Asia, and having new diseases being introduced into North America. I mentioned the survey, the diseases, so forth. These were the counts last year as far as the occurrences of American foul brood, European, so forth, that were seen. This is for the states that responded to the AIA survey. You can see, of course, that as I mentioned before, European foul brood is far in a way the bigger concern that we have as far as the foul broods, as far as its persistence and occurrence. And also what we're seeing is that there seems to be a bit of a shift in the European foul brood in that it's lasting longer. When I got into beekeeping 40 odd years ago, European foul brood was looked at as stress disease that would clear up as soon as the major nectar flow, the spring flow started. Now we're seeing it linger longer into the summer and then into the fall. Part of that, of course, is the stress that our bees are under, both from the varroa mite and also environmentally. And so I think that's kind of helping that European foul brood to kind of linger because it's making them a little less resistant to these other diseases like European foul brood. And so looking at and helping to build up the health of the colony, the health of the individual bees will go a long way to help to suppress and getting us back to normal, if you will, as far as some of these diseases, these stress diseases are concerned. Oh, and if you're worried about the vaccine, no American foul brood was reported in Virginia in 2022. We had, I think, 2 cases of American foul brood in 2021 and nothing in 2020. So again, the incidence of American foul brood in Virginia is very low. So I applaud all of your efforts in keeping it suppressed. Here's what we see in our inspection reports. The various, this is, where we saw most common, if you will, of the issues that we had or things that we saw in our hives as we were doing inspection of the apiaries. And I wanted to note on here that 50% of the problems were beekeeper related. The laying worker, the mouse damage, the drone laying queen, the poor brood pattern. Those are things that the beekeeper should be able to recognize and to deal with. The laying worker is going to give you lots of drones. It's very, it's not common, as you can see from the list, but it's very easy to recognize with the multiple cells. And of course, the fact that you're only raising drones, the low worker populations. We like to, when we go into a beehive, beekeepers like to see lots of bees. And that means that every frame has got some bees on it. It doesn't have to necessarily cover every frame, but you've got bees patrolling it. And that's helping us to keep things down like the small hive beetle. It's given us an ability to help maintain the integrity of the colony, the health of the colony, suppressing the wax moth damage that can arise. So these are things that you need to be aware of when you're going through your inspections, that it's not something that you want to be lingering in your hives. And if we're being called in to do these inspections, those are, it's, to me, it should be something that you've recognized before we go into it. You should be looking inside your hives before we get there to deal with anything that we potentially might see and say, okay, I'm seeing larvae of the small hive beetle, you can't get a health certificate, or I'm seeing, mite damage that is so high that this colony is not going to be sustainable. Where these are not necessarily disease related, it is something that impacts your product. And so, like I said, it is something that you should be aware of and be looking out for. And again, going back to those diseases, the two that stand out to me are the varroa and the nosema. They are the most, well, other than the small hive beetle adults, they're probably the most prevalent and the most virulent as far as its impact on the hives. In Virginia, in 2022, we've been conducting or participating in a national survey for honeybee diseases and pests. And so part of that, we send off samples to the USDA. They look at the varroa mite count, they look at the nosema count, they look at the viruses that are in there, various things that help to tell you what the health of the colony is. Takes you a while to get the information back, but to us, as far as the apiary inspection service, it gives us an idea of how we can best help our beekeepers and what we need to be directing our efforts towards, as far as education, but also training and looking for other ways of dealing with it. Varroa mite is, again, number one as far as our pest that's inside the hive. You can see the numbers keep going up through the year. Spraying is below that 1 per 100. By the time we're getting into the fall, we're getting into that economic threshold of 3. And some people have said that it should be 1, economic threshold of 1 mite per 100 bees. So it is something that we work with the beekeepers in recognizing, sampling for, encouraging that sampling, working with the local associations to put on training programs to how to do the sampling, what to do to what preventive measures you can do in order to help keep the mite populations down before you have to make that intervention of turning to the formic acid and the oxalic acid and the apivar and on and on and on, so that you don't have to be using chemicals inside the hive. But the other concern, as I said, was the nosema. As you see in there, coming out of winter and going into winter, that's when we see our highest counts on those. And of course, these are things that are going to affect in the wintertime, going to affect the longevity of your bees, just like the varroa mite. And so a lot of their losses are not just the result of the varroa mite, it's a combination of the varroa mite and the nosema. And a survey that Ms. Trainer or Dr. Trainer did several years ago or 3 years ago. She was looking at, as far as in her analysis of that data that we're getting back from the national survey, over 1,000 apiaries were sampled. We saw almost 50% of the colonies had the presence of nosema there. We look at it as using the old data as far as that nosema apis levels of 1 million spores per bee. Nosema serrana, which is more prevalent, maybe we should be looking at that, 500,000 spores per bee, because it is more virulent. It is having a more of an impact. It is more resistant to treatments. So suppressing it is more difficult than the nosema apis was. High pesticide levels, incorporation with fungicides, so forth, all of those are adding to the impact that nosema has on our honeybee colonies. Unfortunately, we only have one product, Fumidillin B, to treat for nosema. And there's questions about whether it is as effective as it should be against Nosema serrana. It has good efficacy against Nosema apis, but not as good a control with Nosema serrana. If you use an oxalic acid, the data is showing that we are seeing some control of nosema with the use of the liquid dribble method with the oxalic acid. The bees are ingesting it, they're getting into the gut. Of course, like I said, it's an acid. There is concern that it's disrupting the microorganism, all the different things that occur inside of these gut and their digestion, but it is definitely having an impact on the nosema. And so in the laboratory, they were seeing a threefold reduction in treated inoculated bees with nosema, a threefold decrease in nosema in those bees, and then in the field, they're also seeing a good reduction as far as the amount of nosema that they're seeing inside of the colony, the prevalence of nosema inside of the colonies. So that oxalic acid is giving us a little added boost or a little added benefit of combating the nosema. And the thing that stood out to me in this study that was done a few years ago was the fact that the treated colonies overwintered correctly, which means they survived. So all of the treated colonies survived. 60% of the untreated colonies died. Now, like I said, they both probably had varroa mites. They both were probably impacted by them, but that added impact of the nosema may be the cumulative effect of the varroa mite in the nosema may be causing some of the deaths that we're seeing as far as our losses of hives. And if the treatment with the oxalic acid can help to mitigate that problem, all the better for use of that oxalic acid in that late winter when the bees are or all the mites are on the bees, or most of the mites are out on the bees. Few last comments I wanted to make. We've got issues with viruses. That's a no-brainer. Deformed wing virus you hear a lot about, but the varroa destructive virus, in our sampling with the annual survey, we're seeing 100% of the samples that we're bringing in have the varroa destructive virus. So it is something that we are concerned about. Yes, all the other viruses are an issue, but that varroa destructive virus seems to be more prevalent than any of the other viruses that are out there. And if you're sampling for mites and you're worried about killing the bees because of using alcohol versus a sugar shake, there's studies coming out of Arkansas. I think they're going to be probably published this year, showing that while alcohol gives you 100% mortality, you're seeing about 57% mortality with the sugar shake. And it's interesting. It's not a direct death of the bees that are affected. It's the fact that they become a little lethargic, and the other bees pick up that they're not as healthy, if you will, as the others, and so they basically escort them out the hive. So you're seeing, like I said, you're seeing the loss of those bees that are going through the sugar shake for treating or sampling for the varroa mite. But it's it's not a direct loss. It's a kind of a delayed effect that we're seeing. One of the things that I asked them about and didn't get an answer to was that, what's the impact on the queen? The reason that we do the sugar shake, or that beekeepers want to do the sugar shake as opposed to the alcohol wash, is that, again, alcohol wash, 100% loss. If you mistakenly catch a queen in the sampling jar, she's dead. Sugar shake, we assume she's going to live. Again, I didn't get an answer to that. Hopefully that's something that they'll look at in the future to see if the queen might be a little more resilient with that sugar shake and less harmed as part of the shaking aspect of it. But like I said, it is something that you should be aware of, that the sugar shake, may not be as nice on the bees as we would like. And in small hive beetle, I'm not going to go into the history and fermentation and all of that. I just wanted to point out some of the controls. There is an southeastern insectaries is putting out nematodes that you can treat the soil. and also or I guess she's working on a doctorate. Barry down in Georgia has introduced the TP method of controlling the small hive beetle, or at least to get the larva out of the comb, so that it can be reused. And basically, you're setting up your frames in a TP style over a black top or dark plastic coating, something. And what it does is the heat of the sun, the light of the sun, the small hive beetle larva will exit out of the cells, get down on the blacktop and so forth, and just get fried. So if you like smashing small hive beetle adults, you'll love seeing these larvae come out and just get fried on the blacktop. And then lastly, the beehive distribution program. Don't know how many or if any of you participated. This is the distribution that we'll be seeing this year. So we are just sent the last list of recipients to the supplier so that they can be shipping out those final beehive units to individuals. So about a month or so from now, everybody should have received their beehive units. As you can see, pretty much every locality across the state, with a few exceptions, is receiving at least one, if not multiple, beehive units. Interesting thing this year was that, in past years, we saw a lot of beehive units going to Northern Virginia, going to the Southeast and the Tidewater area, around the Richmond area where majority of the population is located. This year, the biggest location was Campbell County. So it's just, we're seeing through the years, it's that distribution is getting a little more even, if you will, as far as where those beehive units are going. So with that, I'll finish, and then open it up to you if you have any questions, any comments, any encouragement. We're all looking for encouragement.
Okay, Keith, thank you very much. I do have a question from Mary. She typed in the chat, going back to the oxalic acid vapor. Is the grams based on volume of bees or boxes?
It's based on boxes. So it's 1 gram per brood box. And it's assumed that you're using a deep box. So if you have your bees in a deep box, that would be 1 gram. If you have them in 2 deep boxes, that would be 2 grams. Conversely, if you've got 2 mediums, you should be associating that with 1 gram.
Did that work, Mary? Silence. Okay, thumbs up. Anyone
Thumbs up.
We got the boss here. Fire away. What's your questions? Okay, then I'm going to ask you a question. Okay. So back to the vaporizer with the half mask.
Yes.
And you're wearing goggles, but doesn't if you get gas in the mucous membranes, doesn't that get absorbed? I mean, wouldn't you want to wear a full face plate?
I generally will use the full shield. Mm-hmm. With the half mask. You're talking about the cartridge with that. So
I'm talking about the full face plate with the cartridge.
Yeah, I mean, ideally you would do that. Not all of us can afford it. I mean, right now the recommendation is for goggles to keep it out of your eyes, and then the half face mask, cartridge mask, to keep it out of the nostrils from breathing it in if it's vapor. If it's the dribble or the spray, you can use that. Like I said, you can use that N95 mask to keep from breathing that in.
Okay, Katie, I'm not sure your first part. Is there not a push or a push? Come on, voice.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Why is there no push towards developing a vaccine for the stuff that Varroa brings with it?
You mean the vaccine, the viruses?
Yes, sir. We got a COVID vaccine, so anything's possible at this point, right? Not there, little masks on my bees.
It was, yeah. I mean, the more molecular type, more complex vaccines that are out there, probably not going to come along with beekeeping because there's just not a big enough industry out there to pay for all of that research and development. Again, I'll use Miticure as an example. When the beekeepers complained that the Miticure wasn't working back in the early 90s, and were, they were taking the company to court to recoup some of their losses. That's when the company pulled it. They said there's just not enough money out there in the beekeeping industry to support these losses, and so they just pulled it off the market. It was still, it was still registered. It was still, if you had it, you could still use it. In fact, one of the people that lived down the street from me was one of the developers, one of the people that helped develop that. And Wayne can tell you that he thought it was a good product. He thought it was a product that would help the beekeeping industry. But again, it just wasn't something that financially the company could put money towards.
And I think the most important question in my mind is, how often do you get stung every year? Because in the small group of beekeepers I hang out with, there's a certain threshold of acceptable stings for Katie, and I did not do well with that threshold that year.
I get that question every time I go out to the elementary schools and other schools.
Because I'm a 10-year-old.
They'll ask you how often you get stung, and my response to that is, you mean today? So yeah, it is part of the job. We actually have one of our inspectors is highly allergic to bee venom. So he goes the whole 9 yards as far as the suit and the gloves and the everything. And he's, we're checking him out every time we come out of the bee yard. We're checking to make sure there's not a bee around him when he comes out of that. So like I said, it's part of the things you sign off on when you accept the job.
Okay, we have two other questions in chat right now. One from Robert. Do you see a distribution pattern in the small hive beetle across the state? And are sandy soils more prone to support them?
Where we're seeing the biggest problems is in shaded areas. So if you've got your beehives that are in the shade, particularly the afternoon shade, that's where we're seeing the problem. I'm not seeing so much issues of the soil, and yes, soil type does matter. Just I don't think it matters as much as that shade does. The sandier soil, they're able to get into and to get into burrow deeper into to give them some resistance against the winter if we have a winter next year. But the harder clay, the granite that you see in the western part and the more northern part of the state, Hanover County, we've got about 6 inches of topsoil, and then it's all hard packed clay. So those areas of the state, the beetles can't burrow into this deep enough to get away from the frost line, if you will.
Okay, and then James has a question. Do you recommend spraying packaged bees with oxalic acid?
No. If you are making up the package and you have a mite problem, you're making it up from your own bees, you have a mite problem, then yes. But the package producers in the southern states are consistently using miticides to help reduce those mite numbers, and you're bringing those bees up from southern states that it may be a week or two before you install it into the hive. That's going to help reduce, just that alone is going to help reduce the mite population that's in there. So like I said, if you suspect that there's a mite problem, yes, definitely use it. But in general, if you're not seeing issues, you're looking into that package, you're not seeing deformed wings, you're not seeing paralysis related issues with the bees look healthy and moving around, I don't know that you need to use it. And with any pesticide, I think judicious use should be the rule of the day. The less you use it, the less likely it's going to give you problems, less likely it's going to give the bees problems, less likely that you're going to see resistance in the mite population.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? We're coming up on 9 o'clock and Keith has been gracious enough to give us an hour and a half. Don't want to keep him too much longer. Final questions? Going once?
All right. Well, let me know when you guys go into in person. I'd love to see everybody again. It's just
We'd love to have you. But thank you so much for, again, donating your time tonight. Well, I won't say donating, but giving your time tonight. And it's always illuminating. And hope to see you in person soon.
okay. All right.
Thank you, sir.
All have
Thank you,
a good
Keith.
season. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Justin, can you hang for a sec?
I sure can.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, gentlemen.
Hey, Todd. So